Good afternoon and welcome to the Preservation Association of Lincoln Brown Bag Lecture Series. My name is Eileen Birch and I'm the coordinator of these brown bags. The Preservation Association of Lincoln is sponsoring today's brown bag. Our speaker today is Roxanne Smith. Roxanne has worked at the Capitol for over 30 years. She studied architecture and geography at the University of Nebraska and received her degree in community and regional planning from Iowa State University, and uses the knowledge gained in her studies to oversee the Office of the Capitol Commission's Capital Education and Promotion Program. She has come to love and appreciate the Capitol for its fine architectural monument and the teaching tool that it is. Roxanne's talk today is about the Capitol Construction Centennial. Please join me in welcoming Roxanne.
Thank you all very much. We shall begin. The photographs that I will use, a lot of historic photographs. These photographs come from the History Nebraska collection as well as from the Nebraska Capitol collection. Perhaps you have seen this photo before. This is the first state capitol in Lincoln. The capitol that we'll be addressing construction is the third capitol to be built on the site. The first capitol you can see was very small. Just out of the frame to the right is the Kennard House, and the capitol was moved from Omaha to Lincoln in 1867, and this building was constructed in 1868. It stood until the mid-1880s when they built the second capitol. The second capitol stood until the mid-1920s. I want you to notice in this image, around the building, you will see a very short wall of like a courtyard wall, and then on this corner of the sidewalk, you will see some kind of monument. Matt knows what kind of monument that is. What kind of monument is it, Matt? Oh, excellent. So bases of light posts. We will see that light post base in several other photographs. So keep your eyes out for it, please. Here is the competition drawings that were held 1919, 1920. There was a nationwide competition to replace the second capitol that was falling down. Here you can see in the bottom 9 are other architects who competed for the building, but on the top you can see Bertram Goodhue, the winning architect's design. And there you can see Bertram Goodhue, the architect of our Capitol. Here you can see the elevation drawing, the final elevation drawing for our Capitol. Flash back. You can see in the competition drawing the dome and the front entrance are slightly different than the final construction. You can see the elevator piers all had domes to be placed on top of them also. So through the 1920, when Goodhue was chosen, June 26th, until they broke ground in 1922, the architectural drawings were modified slightly by the Nebraska Capitol Commission, who was in charge of the project, as well as Hartley Burr Alexander, who was thematic consultant, who helped work on the design. There's Goodhue. There's a section. Here you can see, courtesy of Jamison Wyatt, one of the many tour guides that have worked at our Capitol. He has put a very plain and very simple identification of the 4 phases of construction for the Nebraska State Capitol. It was constructed over 10 years, 1922 to 1932. In our Centennial celebration of the Capitol, we will go through the 4 phases and identify key points to celebrate in each phase. You can see the first phase of construction is in red, and the big X on the upper right of the Capitol you can see marks the cornerstone laying, and the cornerstone of the building. And we recently celebrated the laying of the cornerstone, the beginning of the Centennial celebration. Work began in 1921. There was preparation work that was done. They did stress tests on the clay and the sandstone to be sure that the sandstone would support Bertram Goodhue's 600,000 ton Nebraska state capitol. Here you can see on the southeast lawn of the building, the second capitol, they are beginning to dig the foundation or dig the hole where they can do their stress tests. The stress tests, they used railroad ties. You can see the railroad ties that are being piled up, waiting to be put into the hole. And you can see some of the very simple mechanical equipment that they would have used for excavation of the building. Here you can see the punch that they would eventually lower into the bottom of the hole and then pile the railroad ties on top of that so that they could measure the amount of weight per square foot that the clay and the sandstone would bear. In the left-hand side of this image, you can see William Yonkin, who was clerk of the works, or the architect's representative, the supervising architect on site. And then I blew that up so you could see Yonkin much more plainly. William Yonkin was an employee of the Nebraska Capitol Commission as well. He was later an employee he was first employee of Bertram Goodhue's architectural office. Then he became employee of the Nebraska Capitol Commission, and later he worked at the Capitol after it was completed. What was his job later, Matt?
Well, his title was Capitol Custodian, but that meant caretaker of the Capitol.
So he was
Superintendent of Buildings and Grounds.
superintendent of buildings and grounds. He was in charge of overseeing the care and maintenance of the Capitol. And History Nebraska photos that we will see, they're all identified with the HN and their number. Those were taken by William Yonkin, and he put together a scrapbook of the construction of the building. And during the 10-year celebration of the construction of the building, we will use those photographs to detail the activities on site. So there, yes, Matt?
I'd also mention the very foot of that punch that you can see facing towards the camera is 12 inches by 12 inches.
Yes.
That's a square foot area, not Muslim area.
Yes, indeed. At the base of the giant punch, you can see it's a 1 foot square, and then that would give them their stress tests. That was the first thing they had to do, was test the sandstone and then provide that information to the engineers that were hired so they could then build the define the superstructure and the steel frame and the concrete footings that would then be the foundation of the building. Here you can see the punch being lowered into the hole where they would do their stress tests. Of interest in this image, of course, I always like to imagine that you can see the little boys that are on top of the giant mound of dirt, watching the mound of soil, watching what they are doing in this test. You can see in modern times with building construction, they put up big barrier fences and no one is allowed on site. But during the entire project of constructing the Capitol, it was an open site and people wandered around and watched what they were doing. As we go through these images, you will be able to see people standing around watching them work. Here you can see an overall view of after they have lowered the punch into the hole, then they have begun to add the railroad ties, documenting the weight that they're putting on. Here you can see people standing around watching again as they're loading the ties onto the top of the punch. This is looking from the southeast corner of the building, looking off toward the north and to the west. There you can see the punch has broken through, so they're able then to distinguish the bearing of the sandstone and its ability to bear the weight of Bertram Goodhue's building. Bob Ripley, the Capitol Administrator, has informed me, which I find very shocking, but true, of course, that if you were to excavate all the soil out from under the Capitol, the sandstone would bear the entire weight of the building, and it would look like a tinker toy. Our beautiful Capitol standing on top of all the piers, and that the engineers then identified as going into that sandstone and being able to support the Capitol. The load-bearing tests were done. The load-bearing report was presented in January of 1922. The tests were done in November and December of 1921 as they were preparing for the building. The railroad construction around the outside of the Capitol, they determined, Bertram Goodhue determined that it would be, the Capitol Commission determined also that it would be less expensive to build a railroad onto the site to bring all of the stone and all the materials on site. The railroad was discussed in February of 1922. And while all this preparation was going on, they were beginning to clear the grounds. There are newspaper articles and stories that as they were clearing the grounds, they would use dynamite. In the middle to the back of this image, you can see what looks like a little bit of smoke or dust. That's probably the remnants of the dynamite that they used to explode the stumps out of the ground. And again, you can see people standing around and watching while all this work is being done. To the far right of this image, again, this is southeast, looking northwest toward the Capitol, and you can see far on the right, you can see the giant mound of dirt from where they had done their stress tests. Here you can see the construction of the railroad in February 11th, 1922. The Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad was chosen, and Lincoln Traction Company was also awarded a contract to provide support. You can see them beginning to come down move west to east along H Street, laying the tracks in the very center of that street. There on the right-hand side, again, there are the spectators. It's also interesting to note that the building constructed with horsepower, not horsepower in terms of mechanical power, but actual horses doing a lot of the work that helped to do the early foundation work and the early work on the railroads to come to the Capitol. If you look at this picture carefully on the far right-hand side, there's a brick building. That brick apartment building is still standing on the corner. The rest of those buildings have all been demolished to include the church there that's on the left side of the image. But if you can imagine living in one of those houses and then having all this heavy equipment coming along, it would be a huge adventure. There you can see the tracks are getting a little bit closer to the Capitol. You can also see the smokestack from the original power generation, steam generation for the building. And then you can see the tracks approaching 14th Street in this image. As they were constructing the tracks and bringing the equipment to the building, excuse me, the Capitol Commission was working with the architect. They were putting out bids. They were signing contracts. This is from the original minutes of the Capitol Commission. I put this onto the screen because I want you to see where it says towards the bottom paragraph on the left-hand page, the W.J. Ossenmacher Company was found to be the lowest competent bidder. Mr. Ossenmacher has called before the commission and agreed that his company, if awarded the contract, would complete 1/2 of the foundation in 4 months and complete the entire contract in 6 1/2 months from the date of signing the contract. If you can recall back, oh, if you can recall back to the image that showed the red first phase of construction, that entire foundation and digging the foundation, putting in the piers, pouring all the concrete walls, excuse me, Ossenmacher had agreed to do that in 6.5 months. If you can imagine this construction that goes on now with all the heavy equipment and all the mechanical equipment, 6.5 months is super speed for digging a foundation and putting in all the foundation and the concrete work. Ossenmacher got the contract on April 12th, 1922. The groundbreaking ceremony was held on April 15th, 1922. Here you can see the motorcade, Commander Joffre, General Joffre, commander of the French forces during World War I, was invited to attend the groundbreaking ceremony. Here you can see the motorcade that brought him onto the Capitol site, and you can see the people gathering for the groundbreaking ceremony. There you can see them in the center of the image. You can see General Joffre saluting, and then to his right, with his hat over his heart, you can see Governor McKelvey, who would speak during the groundbreaking ceremony. You can see other people from World War I are also represented, as well as many other people that gathered. There you can see Governor McKelvey, after he has used the sod-busting plow to break ground. He has dug a trench, and then he presented a speech, which I'm going to read very, very fast. We come now to the 54th year of Nebraska's statehood. During the half-century since this state was admitted into full membership in the Union, this broad expanse of virgin prairie and treeless plains has been transformed into a veritable garden spot of productive lands and comfortable homes. Even as the virgin prairies have been made to blossom like the rose, there has sprung forth here from pioneer blood and strong environment a virile people who believe in popular government as the best state of organized society. The occasion of our meeting today is to perform the first physical act in the erection of a new home for Nebraska's state government. The legislature, in its wisdom, made provision for this building at its 67th session, and a commission duly appointed and acting in harmony with the purpose of the legislative act has sought to lay the foundation for an edifice that will at once prove adequate for the needs of state government and exemplify in all of its elements the strength, the justice, the high ideals, and the inherent love of that people for Nebraska, the inherent love that the people of Nebraska have for their state and the government that it represents. Thus, we may expect that here will rise from these lowly beginnings a monument which, in its permanence of construction and beauty of architecture, shall serve the needs of the state and inspire the people to loftier thoughts of service. We feel, too, that the magnificence and beauty of this building will attract the traveler from all parts of the civilized world to pause and witness here the progress that has been made by a commonwealth of this union in the brief span of 50 years. We recall the first two capitals, and now we know what the third capital looks like. It would have been after 50 years from pioneers coming to Nebraska to see the skyscraper that Bertram Goodhue proposed to build. It would have been a most amazing adventure for the people of Lincoln and the people of Nebraska to see this beautiful capital going up. And that is why we are celebrating the centennial of our capital. There you can see the railroad tracks coming, even as all this is going on and speeches are being made. They're preparing, they're working, they're continuing. By May of 1922, the railroad was completed around the outside of the Capitol. They were beginning to dig the foundation around the outside of the building. There you can see the tracks that come around. You can recognize St. Mary's Church there in the center background. And just to the left of that is the old First Baptist Church. You can see the equipment again that they're using to build the building. And you can imagine being a state employee, a state worker in the second Capitol, watching this activity going on around you. And if you look in the lower left, all those people walking past the construction, one can imagine those are the Capitol workers, the people working in state government, 5 o'clock, walking out of the building, gathering around, checking to see the progress. The construction continues. The foundation is dug. They began to dig the foundation, and there you can see how close the tracks were laid to the actual construction, what would become the walls of the third Capitol. I imagine, I have to be corrected by the experts, of course, but I imagine that long tube, that long pipe that you see going through from the old Capitol to the new building, I like to imagine that's a sewer pipe. It is a sewer pipe. It's sanitary sewer. It's been confirmed. That'll be one of our landmarks. As we look at construction, you will see, of course, they have to maintain their sanitary sewer throughout the construction of the building, but you will see that again and again. Also, as we mentioned earlier, it was an open site. OSHA was not involved in the construction of our Nebraska State Capitol. I want you to notice on the left-hand side, we have where the railroad car is, like next to a wall with a foundation wall dug in the dirt with no shoring. And then you look in front of that and you can see those little derrick, like tripods with the little arms on them with ropes that go down. That's where people went down in holes. The construction workers went down in the holes, sometimes 30 feet deep, perhaps more, so they could dig down into the Dakota sandstone that runs from about 30 feet below surface to maybe 70 feet below surface in some spots, and they had to dig down into that sandstone so they could chunk out the piers that would bear the weight of the Capitol. Also notice that crane or dredge that's on the right-hand side near the building. You can see that move around. Oh, there you go. You can see the sewer, our landmark, the sewer pipe with a little ramp over it. So as they begin to move equipment throughout the foundation work, I don't know if you can tell on the far left, there are some horses with a wagon. And then and there's horses in the middle too, aren't there? Helping to move the soil and bring it closer to the dredge so it could lift it out of the building. Again, there's where they're digging into the piers, they would bring the soil out in buckets and then have to transfer that to the horses and the wagons, and then the horses and wagons would take it over where the dredge could lift it up and remove it from the building. They would lift that soil up out of the building and put it into those rail cars, and then the rail cars would haul it off to Innovation Campus, formerly the Nebraska State Fair site, where they would use it as fill. They began digging the piers, and this is the first image that shows the first concrete that was poured into the piers. Everybody's gathered around, and they're mixing concrete. You can see the tracks behind them, of course, with the rail cars, but they're putting the concrete down into the bottom of the piers. This is the first pour of concrete that was done. Then you can see, imagine they've started on the northwest corner and they're beginning to build around across the north side, and now they're heading to the southeast side of the building. And again, you can see the horsepower that they are using. You can see the derricks that they're using to lower the buckets down into those holes. You can see the series of holes that are the foundation piers that the walls of the basement and the walls of the building will bear onto those piers that go down into the foundation. And again, there's no shoring. They're working right up to the side of the second capitol, and if your office is in one of those lower windows, it would be easy to be distracted from your important state government work and watch what's going on around you, because it's just amazing to imagine. The tower on the left-hand side of the image is a concrete tower.
That's a lift tower.
A lift tower.
Powered by gravity.
Oh, and then they would pour it by gravity, indeed. Yep, it's a lift tower, so they'd raise the concrete up and then pour it by gravity. Here you can see the brick walls on the interior going up. This would be, I'm going to speculate, north side. It's, oh, there's my sewer pipe. Wow. Our landmark, indeed. So there you can see the sewer pipe once again going through, and then you can see part of the foundation. The supporting walls are being dug and poured as concrete, and then other enclosing walls are being done in brick. I don't think the brick walls are bearing, load bearing. No.
Like the protection over the waterproofing before they pour the concrete in.
Oh, so the brick is protection over the waterproofing before they pour the concrete in. Then did the brick stay? Then the brick stayed there, because I know when you go into the basement of the Capitol, you can see many, many different brick walls. Again, horsepower. There's our sewer pipe again. You can see them continuing. Oh, this is from the west facing to the east, looking at, they're starting to pour, east facing west, and they're starting to pour some of the concrete floor. You can also see the little squares. Those are all those piers that were hand dug by people 30 feet down into a little tiny hole to get down to the sandstone. It's very difficult to imagine, impossible for me to imagine the work that went on, because as we will recall, Ossenmacher says he's going to have this whole project done ready for the cornerstone in 6.5 months. They're coming across the south side. This is the southwest corner looking to the northwest part of the foundation. You can see the truck that's down there now. So someplace they would have had to have a ramp down there to get that truck in. And then you can see sort of a little bit towards the back where the St. Mary's Church is. Just like right in front of that, you can see what looks like a walkway that's going over the excavation work. That would have been the walk that the state workers, who are now totally enclosed by the foundation, the basement of the third Capitol, that's how they would have entered and exited the Capitol, is over on those little walkways. And there you can see, heading home, there go the state workers, while the people are beneath them pouring the foundation, doing the excavation work, doing the foundation. There you can see this is northeast corner looking west, because those rebars that are sticking out are where they will eventually lay the cornerstone in that northeast corner. Does that sound about right? Yep, in that northeast corner, you can see again one of the concrete towers. You can see the walkway that staff would have used to enter and exit the building, and then you can see some of the shoring work that they're putting up. I was going to say, I think it's southeast, because we can't see St. Mary's back there. So if that's on the north side, so this would be. No, concrete lifter hasn't moved. So this is east side. See, this is the good part of having Matt Hansen, preservation architect, and Bob Ripley, capital administrator, and Jameson Wyatt, tour guide, former tour guide of our capital, who has devoted a lot of time and attention to learning more and more about the capital. And Jason also administers the capital's Wikipedia page. So please check it out, because there's a lot of useful information on Nebraska Capital, as well as on our capital.nebraska.gov page. So south side, looking north across the east side of the building. And there you can see, this is the Cornerstone Corner, because there is St. Mary's Church. And you can see the foundation work is going on, the concrete work is going on. They're just zooming along indeed with all of the concrete work, and then they're working around from the north side to the south side to the east side, and then going west, and then back up the west side of the building. It's just go, go, go. Here you can see the celebration of the laying of the cornerstone. The Capitol was to be dedicated to the soldiers, to the men who fell in service of their country. The construction of our building came right after World War I, the Great War that was to end all wars. So the people who built our building believed that they were going to achieve something very wonderful, as mentioned in the speeches, that it would be a monument to noble life and civilization, and thousands of people, you can see from the photo, thousands of people would come to see the cornerstone laying. You can also see the foundation work that's going on. They'll be putting in different shoring, but this is the crane that's in the center to the little bit to the right. I don't know if you can see hanging down there in the audience, you can see the little white block that is the cornerstone as they prepare to lay the cornerstone. There you can see the Capitol Commission on the dais as they get ready. You can see the Capitol Commission in their top hats. You can see Governor McKelvey there in the dark suit. And then they had other dignitaries representing World War I that were in attendance. There you can see Governor McKelvey as he is reading his speech. And I will just read a brief excerpt because it's inspirational words, and it reminds us each and every day of what an amazing and wonderful Nebraska State Capitol we have. Upon this occasion, we evidence our purpose to erect here a temple of justice, a home for the state government of Nebraska. The larger purpose of our undertaking is to so lay the foundations of this structure and to so fashion its surfaces and lines that the thoughts and hopes and aspirations of all who see it may be lifted to loftier ideals of government and great deeds of service. Thus shall we inspire in the hearts of the people a lasting love and memory of those who died that popular government might live. It is the hope that these ends may be attained. Your commissioners, through their architect, have evolved a type of structure which at once combines the principal elements of architectural grace and utility. With its foundations built to the solid rock, its ample base providing the maximum of available space and light in proportions to cubage, and its symmetry of form giving dignity to the motto, equality before the law. Its stable surface and beautiful limes form a fitting base for a tower which steadily reaches upwards, carrying with it the eternal inspirations and hopes for the future, while the statue of the sower at the topmost height gives silent warning to the immutable law that whatsoever a man soweth, so shall he reap. Then you can see there is the cornerstone being prepared to be laid. If you look at the left-hand side of this image, you can see what could very well be Civil War veterans attending the cornerstone laying. In fact, they had a person there who had attended the cornerstone laying of the second Capitol, who was also in attendance. And you can see the cornerstone of the second Capitol there behind the photographer in the foreground. You can see nurses in attendance, military nurses in attendance, all the people who would be there to dedicate the cornerstone to the memory of those who fell in service of their country. There you can see again the cornerstone laying, which we most recently celebrated on November 11th, 2022. You can see they are putting the cornerstone in place. Ceremonially, they were laying the mortar inside the cornerstone and putting it onto its foundation base. Then you can see them preparing to place the cornerstone of the second Capitol beside it. Cornerstone of the second Capitol is being laid in place. And then there you can see the cornerstone as it appears today with the second Capitol's cornerstone right beside it on the northwest corner of the building. And then you can, from the northeast corner, you can look up across the building toward the tall tower and imagine from November 11th, 1922, laying of the cornerstone, and then 10 years later, the entire edifice is completed, and we have our beautiful monument that is the Nebraska State Capitol. For more information about the 100th anniversary of the Capitol, you can go to our Capitol's website, capitol.nebraska.gov/100th anniversary. And as we go through the 10 years of the construction of the building, we will put information on that website, and at that more photographs, more discussion, more description, and in the Capitol's website, capitol.nebraska.gov, you will find much information about the building, the original competition. You will find the architect's discussion of what he hoped to achieve with the new Capitol. So if you have the time to look at our website, please, you will find a lot of information that will help you learn about and appreciate the Nebraska State Capitol. Oh, and that's it. There'll be time for questions, but there are no questions because I was very clear, right? Oh, there's a question.
We trust that there will be subsequent presentations on later phases of construction of the building as
Yes.
time passes through this 10-year centennial period.
Yes, yes. We're going to do our best to provide information to citizens about the 10-year construction of our building.
Yeah, Roxanne, I have two questions. One, at its height, how many people were working on the site in construction?
Oh, goodness. I believe that approximately over the course of the 10 years, there were over 3,000 distinct individuals who worked on the building, but at any one time, it would be impossible to imagine. The building constructed over 4 phases. There were 3 contractors during the construction of our building. And each of the contractors then hired their own people, hired their own trades. So any documentation of how many people they had on site would be with the engineering firms that constructed the building and not with the Capitol Commission. So we wouldn't have an idea of how many were working specifically, Bob.
And then Was the foundation laid all the way around the building or just on two sides and then filled in on the other sides?
It was laid all the way around because you from that one of those images you could see they had the walkway. So they had excavated a moat around the second Capitol, and then they had to have those little bridges that would go over.
But the actual building on the foundation took place in phases.
Yes, I wonder how I get back to the beginning. Oh,
I have a question about
Okay.
the cornerstones.
Mm-hmm,
So the new cornerstone for the building, and then they put the second Capitol cornerstone, but the second Capitol was still there. So they took it off of the building and put
yeah, yeah.
it. Okay.
The second Capitol had suffered from freezing and thawing. The local Nebraska limestone was starting to fail, and they had to shore up the second Capitol as the foundation was starting to fail. That was one of the reasons why they went down to the Dakota sandstone, is because the foundation of the second Capitol wasn't very strong and stable. So I think it would have been fairly easy for them to chunk out the cornerstone of the second Capitol. Well, yes, there's comments.
So related to that, in those images with the foundation excavation, they're going right up along
Oh.
the far east and west sides of the old Capitol
Should I go
building.
backwards?
Was
Well,
there-
I'll blast back. Yes, Jameson?
Have you found any mention, or were there any fears at all of, like, especially the east wing of the old Capitol, like, just completely failing? I mean, because it was already, that foundation on the east side was already in bad shape to begin with. It just looks like it's on the verge of collapse.
Yeah, it does indeed. Documentation?
This current photograph on the screen shows the bearing plates, those black squares that are at the balcony level, just above first floor, and that cross-like form up on the face of the building. Those were not part of the design of the original building, the second Capitol. Those are remedial plates that were put in place to hold the building together, and it probably kept them from the building from collapsing on the original cornerstone, which they took out and reset in the new building. But that's evidence of serious damage and settlement on the second Capitol while it's in place. Those are just bearing plates on the face of the building.
And they're digging into clay also, so possibly the clay is structurally a little bit stronger than if it would have been just loose soil. Bob?
Yes, so the building, the footing or the holes for the piers and stuff was a very quiet sort of thing compared to today, how we do it. So if this had been built with contemporary equipment, we might have knocked the old Capitol down with the hammering and
Yeah.
stuff they do.
The person 30 feet below the ground in a well hole digging out the dirt, but it would have been disconcerting to be at the bottom of the hole 3 feet in
Sure.
diameter, looking straight up to see the sky.
Yeah, but it
Yeah.
was it
But-
was it was safer
that's-
for the old Capitol than the
That's-
contemporary methods.
That's a very good point, Bob, indeed, because the horses, maybe they would have made a little bit of noise, jingle, jingle. I don't know, the dredges and things that they would have made some little tiny bit of noise, but no jackhammers, no big, I don't know what, front end loaders clawing everything. So no real heavy equipment to jolt the ground. So yeah, it would have been a little bit more structurally safe to get up that close to the foundation without shoring.
One thing that I think is, is it on?
Yep, it's on.
One thing that I think is fascinating is that one of the architects that failed to win went over and won the creation of the First Plymouth Church. And and in my mind, my imagination, I can hear him saying, they want a tower? I'll give them a tower.
Indeed, the First Plymouth Church looks contemporary to, as it is, contemporary to our capital. Indeed, it's a lovely addition to the city.
So the question before about the moat around the building, if you could go back to that diagram. So they built the footing all the way around, but they had to leave the ends open, right? So when the footing, you did the footings, but then the phase above, the
Yes.
first floor from ground or grade to first floor was left open on the ends, right? Because of the capital and how it had to get built?
Well,
Or
yes.
remove it or whatever?
Yeah, and then how they had to remove, how they had to tear the second capitol down from into the center. So they did the foundation work for the whole building all the way around, but then they allowed them to be able to haul out construction rubble from the demolition of the second capitol out the east and west sides. So then that's why they closed in phase 2. They closed in the east side and then began to build into the middle. And again, they would have had to do the excavation work to dig down to the foundation level. In phase 2, they would have had to dig the piers to support the building as they were coming in. Also in phase 2, they would have had to dig the piers to support the tower that would be later built in phase 3. So it was huge project. And then if you can, from this image perhaps, this one, you can see looking around the outside of the Capitol now, there are office buildings, there are parking lots, but at the time they were doing this work, it was residential all the way around the building. So if you can imagine the people sitting on their front porches watching this construction of a major skyscraper going on in their midst, it would have been, impossible to imagine in Nebraska, perhaps not in New York City or something, to see this kind of construction. But for Nebraska, this was a major, major big deal project.
So I have another question about the plaza then that's on the east side of the building, which was completed from the second Capitol, right? I mean the west side.
The west side.
Yes, the west side. So what's the timing of that compared to what we're looking at today?
That was in 1912 that they dedicated the Lincoln Monument. So it was on site. I tried to find a photo. Well, if this is looking from the southeast off to the northwest, there where you see that tall skyscraper above the trees, just about in that spot on the Capitol grounds would have been the Lincoln Monument. They did fence off the Lincoln Monument during construction, but then later Goodhue chose to bring the west entrance through the Lincoln Monument, so they had to redesign the plaza of the West Plaza. They cut open the walls, and they redesigned that plaza so that it could be used as an entrance. But the entire time it was under construction, that was fenced off and protected from any kind of damage.
And if you're going to cover this in successive lectures, say okay. But didn't they have to redesign the tower for weight purposes?
I think they designed it initially at double
Oh.
load because it was an intermediate mezzanine level, so there were 2 floor loads, books for every floor of the tower.
Yeah.
7th floor.
I don't think it was ever redesigned.
It was never redesigned. I think they-
So it was always planned to be a steel structure with,
Yes.
but the lower part of the Capitol is basically load bearing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, masonry bearing wall, where the tower is structural steel.
Yeah.
And they did the good use concept of masonry bearing wall tower versus doing it steel. You want to address that?
Yeah, that was, I guess, the basis of what I thought I'd do.
Bob?
Goodhue's concept for the building originally was it was going to be a masonry building. It should be a masonry bearing wall building. His structural engineer, Emil Prager, said, Bertram, we can do that in the base of the building because it is just not that tall and it doesn't rise that high above the ground. We can do a bearing wall building with intermediate steel columns to support interior loads, but the exterior loads of the base of the building were all bearing wall. The tower's another story, because every time you build a tall building, the top floor may be a foot thick. If it's a 10-story building, floor 9 is a foot thick plus 3 or 4 inches. Floor 8 is another 16 inches plus another 3 or 4 inches. Every successive wall as you go down the tower gets thicker and thicker. And with a 400-foot tower, we would have had a rotunda in the center of the building about 4 feet square if we'd have done a masonry bearing wall. So they had to do a structural steel frame, and then the wall thickness from the top floor to the lowest floor in the tower could all be the same thickness because the steel was bearing the load, not the exterior wall. That's the explanation.
And then many of you will recall that we did an exterior masonry renovation project on the building in 1998 to 2010. And one of the things that we, the steel frame for the tower was over-engineered because they had thought that it was going to be book stacks, and so they wanted to bear the weight of all the book stacks for the library. But then they realized that they didn't need that much library storage space, and so they began to plan to put offices in the tower. But because it's so over-engineered that when we did the exterior masonry project, they cut through at all the floor levels, the limestone facade of the building, and put shelf angles. So the steel frame also carries the load of the limestone exterior veneer of the building too now, so that it doesn't, bear on itself, be masonry all the way down and then start to crack so that it bears that weight too.
Since sewer lines are such an important feature of this presentation,
Yes.
the sewer apparently to the old Capitol is connected to, what, M Street, K Street? Okay, so where's the current sewer connected? I stumped them.
I think it goes, I'm going to predict it goes south and west.
You don't know? The Capitol architects don't know where the sewer runs.
Okay. Tomorrow's headline on the Lincoln Journal-Star will be, no one knows where Capitol sewer goes. I know how big the sewer pipes are. They're this big. Oh, yes, we can't make that information public, Bob.
The current building, the storm sewer, for instance, is visible in the basement very directly, and there are the storm water that's collected by the roof in the building is collected internally, goes to the basement, and it's all piped under the lawn directly into the storm sewer, but it pumps into it from all 4 sides of the building. All 4 sides have a sewer that exits the basement and runs out to the street on all 4 sides of the building to collect the storm water that eventually goes into the sewer.
But it's not a what do they call them, a dual purpose sewer system where it's sanitary sewer and your storm water flushes it out.
Questions? Okay. Thank you very much, and good job.